He was supposed to die in that alley, and everyone who arranged his execution believed they had finally succeeded in eliminating the most dangerous man in Chicago. Kang Tae-jun lay in a pool of his own blood behind a restaurant that served as a front for his enemies, 3 bullets in his chest, his life draining away with each weakening heartbeat. His own people had betrayed him, sold him out to rivals who had been waiting years for this opportunity. The great Korean crime lord who had built an empire spanning 3 states was bleeding out like a common street criminal, alone and forgotten. But she found him. Amara Johnson, a 26-year-old trauma nurse finishing a double shift at Chicago Memorial, taking a shortcut through the alley she had walked 100 times before without incident. She should have screamed. She should have run. She should have called the police and let whatever was happening resolve itself without her involvement. Instead, she knelt beside him in the filth and darkness and pressed her hands against wounds that should have killed him instantly. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Don't you dare die on me." He opened his eyes, dark and glazed with approaching death, and looked at her with confusion that slowly transformed into something else entirely. She would later realize that in that moment, she had become the most important person in his world. She saved his life that night, using skills honed by years of emergency medicine to keep him breathing until she could get him somewhere safe. She didn't know who he was or what he had done or why someone wanted him dead so desperately. But 3 months later, when Kang Tae-jun finally tracked down the woman who had pulled him back from death's door, he had only one thing on his mind: revenge, not against her, but for her. Because while she was saving his life, others had been destroying hers in ways she didn't yet understand, and nobody touched what belonged to him. The night she found him had started like any other brutal shift at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Amara had been on her feet for 16 hours, dealing with gunshot wounds and overdoses and the endless parade of broken bodies that the city produced. She was exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of soul-deep weariness that came from seeing too much suffering without enough resources to properly address it. Her route home took her through a series of alleys that shaved 15 minutes off her commute. Dangerous, maybe, but she carried pepper spray and had taken self-defense classes. She was careful and alert and had never had a problem, until tonight. She heard him before she saw him, a wet gurgling sound that her medical training immediately identified as someone struggling to breathe through blood-filled lungs. She rounded a dumpster and found him lying there, dressed in what had obviously been an expensive suit now ruined by blood and grime. Her first instinct was to call for help, but her second instinct, the one that had made her an exceptional trauma nurse, was to act immediately. She was already kneeling beside him, assessing wounds, before her conscious mind caught up with her actions. 3 bullet wounds to the chest, massive blood loss, diminishing consciousness. By every medical standard she knew, this man should already be dead, but he wasn't. His heart was still beating, stubborn and strong despite everything working against it. And something in his eyes when they opened and focused on her face made her determined to keep that heart beating. "I need to move you," she said, her voice calm and professional despite the insanity of the situation. "It's going to hurt, but you have to stay with me." He tried to speak, but only blood came out. She took that as agreement. She didn't know how she managed to get him to her car. Adrenaline and determination and something else she couldn't name gave her strength she shouldn't have possessed. She loaded him into her backseat and drove, not to the hospital where questions would be asked and police would be called, but to the small clinic run by her mentor, Dr. Marcus Webb. Marcus had spent 20 years as an army surgeon before opening his clinic in one of Chicago's roughest neighborhoods. He had seen everything and asked nothing, treating whoever came through his doors without judgment or unnecessary curiosity. He didn't blink when Amara showed up at 3 in the morning with a dying man in her backseat. "Bring him in," was all he said, already moving to prepare the small surgical suite that handled cases too complicated for a regular clinic but too sensitive for a hospital. The surgery took 6 hours. Amara assisted, handing instruments and monitoring vitals and refusing to leave even when Marcus told her she should get some rest. "You saved his life," Marcus said when it was finally over. "Getting him here alive with those injuries shouldn't have been possible." "Who is he?" "I don't know and I don't want to know." Marcus looked at her seriously. "You should adopt the same policy. This man has enemies willing to put 3 bullets in his chest. You don't want to be associated with him." She should have listened. She should have walked away and let Marcus handle the recovery and never thought about the stranger with the dark eyes again. Instead, she found herself returning every day to check on his progress. She told herself it was professional interest, medical curiosity about how someone survived injuries that should have been fatal. But the truth was something more complicated that she refused to examine too closely. He was unconscious for 6 days, his body fighting the trauma with a determination that matched what she had seen in his eyes that first night. She learned nothing about him during that time, finding no identification, no phone, nothing that would tell her who she had saved. On the 7th day, he woke up. She was checking his vitals when his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone in his condition. His eyes were clear and sharp, all traces of the glazed confusion from the alley completely gone. "Who are you?" His voice was rough from disuse, but the authority in it was unmistakable. "I'm the person who saved your life. You're welcome." Something flickered in his expression, surprise at her lack of fear perhaps, or amusement at her tone. "Where am I?" "Somewhere safe, a clinic run by a friend who doesn't ask questions and doesn't answer them either." He released her wrist slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "You found me in the alley. Yes, you should have left me to die. I'm a nurse. Leaving people to die isn't really in my skill set. You don't know who I am. No. And I'm starting to think I don't want to know." He smiled slightly, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Smart, but probably too late for that. She didn't understand what he meant until later. Much later, when understanding came with a price she never expected to pay. He healed with remarkable speed, his body seemingly accustomed to trauma and recovery in ways that suggested a history of violence she didn't want to contemplate. Within 2 weeks, he was moving around the clinic with increasing strength and agility. She visited every day, telling herself it was medical supervision, knowing it was something else entirely. They talked during those visits, carefully at first, then with increasing depth. He never told her his name or what he did, but he asked endless questions about her life, her family, her dreams. She told him things she had never told anyone. About growing up poor in the South Side, watching her mother work herself to death to provide opportunities Amara never took for granted. About her brother Darius, who had made bad choices and was now serving 10 years in a federal prison. About her dream of opening a free clinic in her old neighborhood, serving people who had nowhere else to turn. He listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. "You're a good person," he said one evening as she was preparing to leave. "I try to be. Good people don't survive in my world. Then maybe your world needs more good people to change it." He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face into something almost beautiful. "You're either incredibly naive or incredibly brave. Can I be both? In my experience, no. One usually kills the other." She should have asked more questions. She should have demanded answers about who he was and what he had done, and why someone wanted him dead badly enough to put 3 bullets in his chest. Instead, she let herself get lost in conversations that made her forget he was a stranger with secrets dark enough to kill. The day he left, she wasn't there to say goodbye. She arrived at the clinic for her usual visit to find his room empty, the bed neatly made, no trace of him remaining. Marcus handed her an envelope with her name written in precise handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with 2 words, "Thank you," and underneath that a phone number with no other explanation. She should have thrown it away. She should have forgotten about the mysterious man she had saved and returned to her normal life of endless shifts and exhausted sleep. Instead, she kept the paper, folding it carefully and tucking it into her wallet like a talisman against loneliness. She didn't call the number. Not then. She told herself she was being smart, protecting herself from a world she didn't understand and didn't want to enter. But she thought about him constantly. In the quiet moments between emergencies at the hospital, during the lonely nights in her small apartment, she found herself wondering where he was and what he was doing and whether he ever thought about her. 3 months passed. 3 months of normal life that felt increasingly empty compared to those brief weeks of intense connection. 3 months of wondering if she had imagined the chemistry between them, the sense that something important was building. Then her world exploded. It started with small things she almost didn't notice. A coworker who had always been friendly became cold and distant. A loan application she had submitted for the clinic project was suddenly denied without explanation. Her landlord informed her that her lease wouldn't be renewed. Then the bigger things hit. She was suspended from the hospital pending an investigation into allegations of drug theft. Allegations that were completely false but supported by documentation that somehow existed with her signature on forms she had never seen. Her bank accounts were frozen due to suspected money laundering. Her car was repossessed over payments she had definitely made. Her credit was destroyed overnight by debts she had never incurred. In the space of 2 weeks, her entire life collapsed around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. She knew it was deliberate. The precision of the destruction, the coordination of attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, made it clear that someone was systematically dismantling her existence. She just didn't know who or why. Desperate and terrified, she finally pulled out the paper she had kept in her wallet for 3 months. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, not knowing what to expect, knowing only that she had nowhere else to turn. He answered on the second ring. "Amara." His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep and commanding and somehow immediately calming. "How do you know my name? I know everything about you. I've been watching over you since I left." "Watching over me? Then why is my life being destroyed?" Silence on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice had turned to ice. "What do you mean destroyed?" She told him everything, the accusations, the frozen accounts, the systematic demolition of everything she had built. The words poured out in a rush of fear and frustration. "Give me an address where I can find you now." She shouldn't trust him. She still didn't know who he was or what he was capable of. But she gave him the address of the cheap motel where she had been staying since losing her apartment. "Don't leave that room. Don't open the door for anyone but me." I'll be there within the hour. He hung up before she could respond. 43 minutes later, there was a knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, looking exactly as she remembered, except now dressed in an immaculate black suit that screamed wealth and power. She opened the door. He stepped inside and immediately began scanning the room as if checking for threats. Then his eyes landed on her, taking in her exhausted face, her wrinkled clothes, the fear she couldn't quite hide. Tell me everything again, every detail, no matter how small. She sat on the edge of the bed and recounted the past 2 weeks while he listened without interruption. When she finished, his face had transformed into something terrifying, a cold mask of rage that made her finally understand what kind of man she had saved. Do you know who I am? He asked quietly. No, my name is Kang Tae-jun. I control the largest criminal organization in the Midwest. I have more enemies than I can count, and apparently one of them discovered that you saved my life. The words hit her like physical blows. Criminal organization, enemies. The picture suddenly became horribly clear. They're destroying my life because I saved yours? Yes, they can't get to me directly, so they're hurting the person who kept me alive. His hands clenched into fists. They think this will draw me out, make me vulnerable. They're right, but not in the way they expect. What are you going to do? He looked at her with eyes that held no warmth, only cold determination. I'm going to find everyone responsible for hurting you, and I'm going to make them wish they had never been born. I didn't call you for revenge. I know you called me for help, but you saved my life, Amara. That means your enemies are now my enemies, and I don't just neutralize my enemies. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I destroy them completely. She should have been horrified. She should have rejected his offer and figured out some other way to fix her problems. Good people didn't accept help from crime lords, didn't benefit from violence and destruction, but she was exhausted and afraid and completely out of options. What happens to me while you're destroying people? You come with me. You stay where I can protect you until this is resolved. I barely know you. You know enough. You knew enough to save my life when anyone else would have walked away. That was different, was it? He stepped closer, his presence filling the small room. You saw a man dying and you chose to help him. Now I see a woman whose life is being destroyed and I'm choosing to help her. The circumstances are different, but the impulse is the same. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words, maybe because deep down she recognized the truth in what he was saying. I don't want anyone killed because of me. I can't promise that. What I can promise is that every action I take will be proportional to what they've done. He reached out and touched her face gently, a contrast to the violence implicit in his words. They chose to hurt you. They declared war on someone under my protection. The consequences are on them. She closed her eyes, leaning slightly into his touch despite herself. How long? Until every person responsible has been dealt with and your life is completely restored. Weeks, maybe, possibly longer. And then you're free to go, free to return to your life and forget you ever knew me. She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. What if I don't want to forget? Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the cold mask revealing something warmer beneath. Let's survive this first, then we can talk about what comes after. He moved her that night, taking her to a penthouse apartment in a building she hadn't known existed, protected by layers of security that would have seemed excessive for anyone else. The space was beautiful and cold, expensive furniture and artwork, but no personal touches, nothing that suggested a real person lived there. I don't stay here often, he said, reading her expression. I have other properties, but this is the most secure. It feels empty. Most of my life feels empty. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. That started to change 3 months ago, lying in an alley, looking up at a woman who refused to let me die. You barely knew me. I knew you were different. I knew you were someone worth knowing. He paused. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. How did that work out? He smiled grimly. Obviously not well. My enemies were watching me closer than I realized. They saw you help me, tracked you down, and decided to use you as a weapon against me. So this is your fault. Yes, and that's why I'm going to fix it. Over the next few days, she watched him work with a mixture of horror and fascination. He conducted meetings in the penthouse with people who were clearly dangerous, giving orders that resulted in actions she didn't want to know details about. But between those meetings, he was different with her. Almost gentle, certainly attentive, making sure she had everything she needed while they waited for his plans to unfold. They talked for hours, continuing the conversations they had started at the clinic, but going deeper now. He told her about his childhood in Korea, the father who had been a crime lord before him, the mother who had died trying to escape that life. I never wanted this, he admitted late one night. Was supposed to go to university, become a doctor or a lawyer, something legitimate. Then my father was killed and I was the only one left who could hold the organization together. You could have walked away. I tried 3 times actually. Each time someone I cared about paid the price for my attempted freedom. His eyes went dark. After the 3rd time I stopped trying. I accepted what I was and focused on building something that could at least do some good alongside all the bad. Does it? Do some good? Sometimes. We protect neighborhoods that the police have abandoned. We provide employment for people who have no other options. We enforce rules that prevent worse predators from filling the void we would leave. He shrugged. It's not absolution, but it's something. She found herself understanding him in ways she hadn't expected. The world was more complicated than simple categories of good and evil could capture. He was a criminal, yes, but he was also a man shaped by circumstances beyond his control, trying to make the best of an impossible situation. Or maybe she was just rationalizing her growing feelings for him. She honestly couldn't tell anymore. A week after he had brought her to the penthouse, he came home from one of his mysterious meetings with a strange expression on his face. We found them, the people who destroyed my life, yes. A rival organization trying to destabilize my operations by attacking my vulnerabilities. He sat down across from her. They thought you were my girlfriend, someone I cared about enough that hurting you would cloud my judgment. Were they wrong? He held her gaze steadily. Not entirely. Her heart skipped at his admission. What happens now? Now I give you a choice. I can handle this quietly, restore your life without you ever knowing the details. Or I can show you everything, let you understand exactly what was done to you and how I'm making it right. Why would I want to know the details? Because you deserve to, because the choice is yours and informed choices are always better than blind ones. He leaned forward, and because I'm tired of having secrets between us. She considered his offer carefully. The easy path was ignorance, letting him handle everything while she remained clean and uninvolved. But that felt like a lie. She had already been involved the moment she chose to save his life. Pretending otherwise was just denial. Show me everything. He nodded slowly, something like respect in his eyes. Tomorrow, I'll take you to our operations center. You'll see how we work, who we are, what we do, all of it. And if I can't handle what I see, then you tell me and we find another way forward. But I don't think you'll have that problem. Why not? Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, even if you don't know it yet. The next day, he took her to a building in an industrial district, unremarkable on the outside but humming with activity within. Security checkpoints and watchful guards gave way to a sophisticated operations center that wouldn't have been out of place in a corporate headquarters. He introduced her to his key people, men and women who clearly respected him and seemed curious about her presence. She met Alina, his head of security, who looked at her with cool assessment. She met Park Sang-ho, his financial advisor, who seemed almost grandfatherly despite his role. She met others whose names and roles blurred together. Then he showed her the files on what had been done to her. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. They had planted evidence, bribed officials, manipulated databases, all coordinated perfectly to destroy her life systematically while leaving no traceable connection to themselves. This took months to plan, she said, looking at the timeline. They started before I even found you in that alley. They were watching me, waiting for an opportunity. When they saw me go down and you saved me, they adapted their plans. He pointed to a name on one of the documents. This is the man who gave the order. Victor Chen, he leads a rival organization that has been trying to absorb my territory for years. What are you going to do to him? That depends on you. On me? You're the one who was hurt. You should have a say in the consequences. She stared at the name, this man who had destroyed her life for strategic advantage, who had treated her as a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. I want him to know why this is happening. I want him to understand that you can't just destroy innocent people without consequences. That can be arranged. And I want my life back. Everything they took, I want it restored. Already in progress. Your suspension has been reversed, the investigation closed, your accounts are being unfrozen, your credit is being repaired. He paused. I have people who are very good at making problems disappear. She should have been disturbed by the casual way he discussed manipulating systems that were supposed to be incorruptible. Instead, she felt only relief. What about him, Victor Chen? He's being dealt with. By this time tomorrow, he won't be a threat to anyone anymore. She didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Why are you doing all this for me? I'm just a nurse who happened to be in the right alley at the right time. He turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. You're not just anything, Amara. You're the woman who saw me dying and chose to save me without knowing who I was or what it might cost you. You're the woman who kept coming back to check on me, who talked to me like I was a person instead of a monster. He stepped closer. You're the woman who made me remember what it feels like to be human. That's a lot of weight to put on a few weeks of hospital visits. Is it? You know what my life is like. You know how isolated this existence makes you. And then suddenly there was someone who didn't want anything from me, who saw through the fear and the power to something underneath. I was just doing my job. You were doing much more than that. He reached out and took her hand. You were giving me a reason to survive those injuries, a reason to want to heal, a reason to believe that maybe there was more to life than what I had built. And now I want to find out what that more could look like, with you if you're willing. She looked at their joined hands, her brown skin against his pale fingers, two worlds that shouldn't fit together somehow making sense. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with someone like you. I don't know how to be with someone like you either. Someone good, someone who makes me want to be better. He squeezed her hand. But I think we could figure it out together. Your world is dangerous. It is. But I would never let that danger touch you. I would burn everything I've built before I let anyone hurt you again. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed every word and she wanted what he was offering despite all the reasons she should refuse. What about my life, my work, my dreams? I still want to open that clinic. Then we open it, I fund it, you run it, we create something good in the middle of all this darkness. You would do that, I would do anything for you. I thought I made that clear. She laughed despite herself, the tension finally breaking. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? Not when it matters, and you matter more than anything has in a very long time. She kissed him then, not caring who might be watching, not caring about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. His arms wrapped around her instantly, pulling her close with an intensity that stole her breath. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling in a way she had never seen before. Genuine, unguarded, almost boyish. Is that a yes? That's a maybe turning into a probably. I still have questions. I have time, as much time as you need. They returned to the penthouse that night, but the space felt different now, less empty, more like a beginning than an ending. Over the following weeks, Victor Chen's organization was dismantled with surgical precision. Amara didn't ask for details, but she understood from the news reports and the conversations she overheard that justice was being served in ways that courts could never have provided. Her life was restored piece by piece. She returned to work at the hospital, where her colleagues treated her with even more respect than before, somehow sensing that her brief absence had changed her in fundamental ways. She began planning the clinic she had dreamed about for years, now with resources that made the impossible seem achievable. Jun was true to his word, providing funding and connections without trying to control how she used them. Their relationship deepened slowly but steadily. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's wounds, each other's dreams. He told her things he had never told anyone, vulnerabilities that would have been weapons in the wrong hands. She trusted him with her own secrets, the fears she had carried since childhood, the doubts that still plagued her despite everything. 6 months after he had appeared at her motel room door, she moved into the penthouse permanently. The empty space began filling with her touches, photographs, and colors and life that had been absent before. It feels like a home now, he said one evening, looking around at the transformation. That's because it is one. A home isn't about the space, it's about the people in it. Is that something your mother used to say? Every day, she believed that family was the only thing that mattered. Amara paused. She would have hated you on principle. A crime lord dating her daughter, I can't imagine why. But she would have loved who you are when we're alone. The man who cooks breakfast and watches terrible movies and argues about books. That man only exists because of you. He always existed. I just helped you find him again. He pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. I love you. I should have said it months ago, but I love you. I know, I love you too, she smiled against his chest. Even though you're a crime lord with terrible taste in movies. The movies aren't that bad. They're objectively terrible and you know it. He laughed, the sound rumbling through her where they touched. Maybe, but they're better when I watch them with you. 1 year after she had found him in that alley, Amara stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Johnson Community Health Clinic, named for her mother, funded by Jun's resources, staffed by people who believed in the mission of serving those who had nowhere else to go. He stood beside her, out of the spotlight but present, watching her achieve the dream she had carried for so long. Afterward, at the reception, she found a quiet moment alone with him on the clinic's small balcony. Thank you for making this possible. You made it possible. I just provided resources. That's not nothing. Compared to what you've given me, it's everything. He looked at her with the intensity that still made her breath catch after all these months. You gave me a reason to live. You gave me a reason to be better. You gave me a future I didn't know I could have. And you gave me revenge against people who tried to destroy me. That's quite a love story, he laughed. Not the most romantic origin, I admit. I don't know, revenge can be romantic in the right context. Only you would think that. Only you would commit it so thoroughly on my behalf. They stood together, looking out at the neighborhood where she had grown up, now home to a clinic that would serve generations to come. What now? She asked. Now we build more, do more, become more. He took her hand. Together. That sounds like a plan. It's more than a plan, it's a promise. She leaned against him, feeling the strength and warmth that had become her anchor in a world that made less sense than she had ever imagined. I found you dying in an alley. You found me falling apart in a motel room, and somehow we ended up here. Life is strange that way. It takes the worst moments and turns them into foundations for something better. Is that philosophy or experience? Both. Everything I went through, every terrible thing I did and had done to me, it all led to that alley. To you, to this, he gestured at the clinic, at the future they were building. I can't regret any of it because regretting it would mean wishing this didn't exist. She understood what he meant. Her own path had been difficult, full of struggles and sacrifices that had seemed pointless at the time. But each step had brought her closer to this moment, this life, this love. My mother always said that God works in mysterious ways. Do you believe that? I believe that the universe has a sense of humor. That sometimes the worst things lead to the best things if you're willing to keep going. Then I'm grateful for every terrible moment that brought me to you. Even the 3 bullets in your chest, especially those. Without them, I might have walked right past you in that alley, never knowing what I was missing. She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. We're really doing this, aren't we? Building a life together despite everything that should make it impossible. Nothing is impossible. I learned that from a woman who refused to let me die when every logical factor said I should. That woman made a lot of questionable choices that night. That woman made the best choice of her life. He leaned down and kissed her softly, and I intend to spend the rest of mine proving she was right. They went inside together, returning to the celebration, to the future they were creating one day at a time. Some loves are born from disaster, rising from ashes that should have buried them. Some connections form in darkness and grow stronger when brought into light. Some people find each other at the worst possible moments and discover that those moments were exactly what they needed. Imara had saved a stranger's life and found her own purpose in the process. Jun had been given a second chance and used it to become someone worthy of the woman who had offered it. Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. It was messy and complicated and full of compromises that challenged everything they thought they knew about right and wrong. But it was theirs, and in the end, that was all that mattered. 2 years later, she would stand in that same penthouse, now warm and lived in and full of memories, watching their daughter take her first steps across a carpet that had once been purely decorative. Jun would be beside her, the feared crime lord reduced to tears by a baby's triumph over gravity. "She has your determination," he would say. "And your stubbornness," she would reply. "That's the same thing, not even close." Their daughter would fall as babies do and immediately get back up to try again. That persistence, that refusal to accept defeat, was a gift from both of them. The road ahead would hold challenges they couldn't imagine, tests of everything they had built together. But they would face those challenges as partners, as equals, as two people who had chosen each other against all odds. Because that's what love does. It finds a way through impossible circumstances. It transforms enemies into protectors and strangers into family. It takes the broken pieces of two separate lives and creates something whole and new. Amara had learned that lesson in a bloody alley, kneeling beside a dying man she didn't know. Jun had learned it lying in that same alley, looking up at an angel who refused to let him go. And their daughter would learn it growing up in a home built on second chances and fierce devotion. The Korean Mafia boss was supposed to die that night in the alley, but a black woman saved him, and in doing so, saved them both from lives that were slowly killing them in different ways. He wanted revenge for what was done to her. He got something much more valuable instead. He got a future worth living, a love worth fighting for, a family worth protecting at any cost. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you what you need. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gives you someone who changes everything you thought you knew about yourself and what you're capable of becoming. That's the story of Amara and Jun. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real and complicated and forged in the fire of circumstances that should have destroyed them both. They survived. They found each other. They built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. The real revenge isn't making your enemies suffer. It's building a life so full of love and purpose that their attempts to destroy you become nothing more than footnotes in your larger story. That was the revenge Jun ultimately achieved. Not through violence, though there was that too, but through transformation, through becoming someone worthy of the woman who had saved him. And that was the justice Amara ultimately received, not through courts or legal systems, but through a life that proved she was more than what anyone had tried to make her. Together, they wrote a new story, one that began in an alley full of blood and ended in a home full of love. Not a bad outcome for a night that was supposed to end in death, not bad at all.